If anybody wants to turn their cameras on, that would be great.
Yeah.
We do see a lot of black boxes in here. So thanks to those who are already on. Appreciate that. We did do a training, what was it, 2 weeks ago, and about adolescent themes of engagement. And in that training, we mentioned that we talk about button pushing. And so, because of that, we are doing this one today in response because people are saying, well, we want that next one. So, here we are giving
Yeah,
you the next one.
we thought we would just do a real quick overview of one or two of the things we said last time that kind of sparked folks being interested in, well, what's the next steps? I wanted to mention, it's on the slides, we've mentioned it before, but a lot of this comes from a guy named Scott Sells, who has several books, but this was his first one, and this is where a lot of the information comes from. It's called Treating the Tough Adolescent. Scott Sells, Sells. And so he has a kind of, it's called a family-based step-by-step guide. It's lengthy. The steps, there's a lot of steps that he puts in. We're picking kind of the middle part of his model to talk about because I think there's a lot of value in the pieces that we're chatting about. It makes a real difference in how adults think about entering into relationships and conversations with adolescents and what they need to be paying attention to. And I say adults on purpose because this is focused on parents, but as you'll realize, it also has some pertinence for you if you work with adults or if you work with adolescents.
Yeah.
And if you have adolescents or if you interact with adolescents, just to pay attention to how you are entering into the interaction and how they enter into the interaction and what that means for what to pay attention to in maintaining some sort of connection with the adolescent.
Yeah. So I'll slip into that slide you've already started talking about, but I always like to remind everybody, again, this is a self-reflective kind of training as well. So you always want to think about, like, if you respond really agree with us as we're talking and you're like, oh yeah, I really agree, that's a great point, etc., think about why you really agree. And if you disagree with us and you're like, that's really terrible, these guys don't know what they're talking about, think about why you disagree as well. So just really be self-reflective as we go through this training. And it's okay to disagree with us. We're fine with that.
Yeah.
And it's okay to agree with us. That's great too. But we just want you to be aware of why. Why do you disagree? Why do you agree?
And purpose being is that's what you bring into any kind of interaction that you have. And we're believers, Jennifer and I are pretty strong believers that you can't erase yourself, so you better get to know yourself. And you better be honest about the beliefs that you have and how they're going to influence you as you are speaking with anyone, really.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this was a slide we spoke about last time 2 weeks ago. And it's the whole idea of adults enter into interactions, especially with adolescents, from an outcome-oriented sort of way. And so they are looking for the end result. They want results, and they want rules to be followed in those outcomes. And so it's very cognitive. It's very detail oriented. It's very take out the trash, do your homework kind of way of interacting. Adolescent,
Whereas,
oh, go ahead.
yeah, whereas I was going to say in comparison, the adolescent responds to the take out the trash, do your homework in a very different manner. They're focused on the process, they're focused on the emotions of that interaction. So John is my dad right now, and he tells me to take out the trash.
Yeah, I need you to take out the trash, Jennifer.
Yeah, I don't want to take out the trash. Like I took out the trash yesterday and like last week. You know what? I think I'm the only one in the house that takes out the trash. I don't think you've ever taken out the trash.
I've taken out the trash, but right now I need you. I know you took it out. I need you to take it out again. It's full, and it's one of your jobs.
I have all the jobs. I'm always the one doing all the jobs. No
You
one ever does. You know what? My sister, she never does it. She's over there. You don't ever ask her to do it. Well, what is she,
Heather
like a princess and
Heather
I'm the
does
Cinderella? Like I have to do everything? I don't understand.
Heather
Why do I
does
have to do it?
Heather does her jobs when I ask her to do them. Why is it always an issue with you?
Heather's always the best one. You love Heather more than you love me.
That we're not going to get into this. Take out the garbage.
I can't. I'm so upset about how much you love Heather and not me. I
Look,
just can't. I'm gonna sit down. I just can't handle it anymore.
boy, that sounds like your daughter. You just started getting into your daughter. I'm gonna sit down. I can't handle it
You
anymore.
are good at it. It seems like you have done it before.
But so what we want to point out is Jennifer in no way was acting in a evil way.
Yeah.
Jennifer is being herself. She's being a teenager. She is living in an emotional world where she's paying attention to fairness, respect, and things like that. I am, on the other hand, trying to get her to do something. And what she's doing is inviting me into her emotional space.
And as an adolescent, I'm way more skillful at that
Yeah.
because I live in that world. That's where I'm at all the time. As an adult, John is not in that world. He doesn't live there. So now if I can get him to start talking and addressing with me how much like he loves me as my dad and like he treats all of his kids the same, any of that kind of stuff, I've just totally thrown off this discussion about the trash can.
Yeah. And
So
I started doing it, but your role play was cracking me up, so I pulled out of it. But it was I started getting invited into that emotional place. It's like I was explaining to Heather does it when I tell her to do it. Now I need you to just take it out, and now I'm raising my voice, which means I'm beginning to be invited into that emotional space with her.
yeah.
Now, there's I tell folks I supervise all the time. There's nothing wrong with being in that emotional space if
Mm.
you're there intentionally. But if you're there not on purpose, but because you have accepted an invitation and unknowingly are now in this emotional space with them, trust me, adolescents can live there all day. And by the way, this is what we tell parents. We'll talk to parents about this, and we'll talk to any adults about this, and and so they'll live there. And at the end of the interaction, Jennifer will go off. She may even go take out the garbage,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm pissed. I'm mad. And I'm losing my mind, and I'm talking to whoever will listen to me about how disrespectful this is, and it's always something with her, and I'm in this space, and Jennifer's just, it was just another interaction for her.
Yeah.
This is where an adolescent lives.
And there's a question, were you invited or sucked in the emotional space? And I think that speaks to like the intention,
Yeah.
of it. I think you find yourself like, if you pay attention, I'm being invited in, I'm gonna like watch my reaction here intentionally versus I'm gonna get sucked in, I'm gonna get pulled in. And so that's really what we're talking about today, is that difference. Like, what do you do with those invitations?
Yeah.
So that's
yeah.
the big thing we're going to discuss. And we're saying that this isn't because the teenagers are bad, mean, chemically imbalanced, or any of that stuff. They're like run by their hormones. We're not saying any of that. And in fact, we also look at, Dan Siegel came up with like these benefits and challenges of adolescence. And he talked about, we won't go into this in a lot of detail, but these are kind of the 4 things that he talks about: that they're open to change, that their drive is based on social connections. They have that increased emotional intensity that we're focusing on here right now. And that's got some positive things to it as well. They have high energy. They have a zest for life that really drives them to be open to change, to be kind of, they need that to figure out who they are, what their identity is. They need that creative exploration. They need to have that imagination and curiosity in that space. But it also, because of these things that they're really focused on and developmentally where they're supposed to be, it also leads them to get into that emotional world a lot of times, and like really not want to engage in that like outcome oriented kind of scenarios. So what we talk about is, if we're going to change the process of interactions, this is really an answer to being sucked in, or how you're going to respond to the invitation.
Yeah, we had a lot of questions last time, 2 weeks ago, about, all right, so how do we explain this, and what happens, and what do you do with it? And so this is that point where in Scott's model, he talks about, there's a point where you will do some psychoed with parents, and you will talk to them about this difference in interaction, and then how to change the process of an interaction with an adolescent. And the first part of that is to look at, what are the buttons that I have that my adolescent pushes? Because those buttons are the invitations into an emotional exchange. It's an invitation into me becoming emotional in my interaction with my adolescent.
Yeah, in that example, in that role play that we did, I personally know that my dad, John, has a button that he wants. When I say, oh yeah, you love my sister more than you love me, that's going to push his button. Like, I know that about him. We've had this conversation multiple times.
Well, and my daughter knows that I concern myself with fairness, and that I love my kids all alike, and so she's going to leverage that, and not out of evilness. It's out of living in an emotional space.
Yeah.
And again, I said this 2 weeks ago. If you can think back to your adolescence, you were emotional too. Remember, there was the greatest song ever written. Oh, this is the best song ever. Oh my God, did you see what they did over there? You just live in this sort of place, and it's a place that is familiar and comfortable for the adolescent. And then we lose it and become adults, and we want our adolescents to be in our adult world. And so what we're going to do is walk the parents through the idea of buttons. What buttons are they susceptible to? And then some techniques to respond differently when their buttons are being pushed. Because one of the things you'll see here in a minute is we don't let the adults off the hook. I don't let counselors off the hook. You push adolescents buttons also. And we all do. Yeah. And so it's a matter of that we push their buttons and then expect them not to be emotional when they start off emotional. So we'll talk about that here in a minute, but that's sort of the next pieces that we're about to do. So
yeah. Now, if we were in person, we would be giving you little round cutout circles and some tape, and we would be having you break up into small groups, and then you would be. So we're telling you this because this is something that you can do in a group as well with parents. So
we would put parents together, maybe like two groups of two sets of parents or three sets of parents, and we would hand them a we would first introduce them to some examples of buttons that adolescents push that that we've heard from before. And so can you go to that slide, Jennifer?
Yep.
So this is in two slides. We actually have a handout that we just put it all on one, and you just give it to them and you say, okay, so let's talk about these for a minute. And this is the activity that we do. We'll say, here's some of the buttons that we've found that push that adolescents do that push an adult's buttons.
And if so, can anyone think of a button that, like, something that triggers you, that brings up some sort of emotion in you, that maybe an adolescent says to you in a therapy session,
or at school?
You can yell it out or put it in the chat, or at home, or at your school, or in class, wherever it is that you're working. Does anyone have something that upsets you, that irritates you? I know there is.
You just wouldn't understand.
Ooh, you just wouldn't understand. That's a good one. So, and I don't know where it came from. It came from the what?
It was from
You don't care for me.
You don't care for me. You just don't understand. So think about, where do you feel that? What emotion comes up, and where do you feel that in your body when that is said to you? You just don't understand. You just don't care about me.
You're only doing this for a paycheck. Why do you care?
Where do you feel that?
My parents. You're triggering me. So as y'all are putting that in, or as you're thinking about this, what Jennifer's asking is, do you feel that like in your heart? Do you feel it in your head? Do you feel it in your fist? I mean, do you feel it in your foot? Do you, where does that hit you? And then what we do in the activity is we ask the parent to take a button, and they're different size buttons. Is it a big button? Is it a little one? And we have them tape that button to where they're feeling it.
and you start looking around. So somebody said they feel it in their stomach. Somebody said, I feel it in my chest. So we would have you tape that button right there on your chest, right there on your stomach. And we'd start.
Yeah, one of mine is I'm bored and I just want to lose my mind. So it probably goes on my head. Yeah, and then we ask the parents after we start generating some of those as a group. We ask the parents to, in small groups, talk more about it and think of more buttons and where they feel it, and every time they speak of a button, and put it on them. And so we want them putting buttons on them, and it's really interesting because when parents start sharing, they'll share something and another parent will go, oh God, yeah, that's one of mine too. And so it becomes very energized.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of funny too, because people are beginning to pay attention to things that their adolescence does that really get to them.
And it really is. I mean, you think about this as a parent and you think about this as a counselor, you think about this as a teacher, you think about this as whatever it is, whatever your role is. And you start to be more self-reflective. You can like look at, what do I react to? And you can start to consider and dig deep within yourself too, of why does that one upset me so much? Why is this such a trigger for me? Why is it so upsetting? Why is it so upsetting for you, John, that they say, I'm bored? I'm so bored.
I don't know. I think it's go climb a tree then. I think I grew up having to entertain myself. I was a latchkey kid, so it was a matter of I was on my own to do, and so boring kills me.
Yeah.
And it just and I don't know the whole reason why, but I know that that's one that I get real smart alecky with an adolescent when they say something like that, and I know I do it. And so once you let parents do this for a while, or if you're doing it with just one set of parents, um I would still have them put buttons on them, because then when you look at yourself and you have 5, 6, 7, 8 buttons all over you, that's a time to think about, look at how vulnerable you are. Look at all of the ways that you are invited into emotional, and there's more than this, but the
Yeah.
buttons are just those easy entry points into getting you into an emotional place.
Yeah. Because one of mine is like the rolling of the eyes, and that's such a dumb idea.
Yeah.
I'm like, awesome. So you really like start looking at these, but there's so many more. But this is a really good tool for just starting the discussion, just listing these 11, and you can come up with more as well. But these 11 buttons that get parents to get emotional, to go off subject, to start to really respond. As therapists, think about this in like a supervision, or like a discussion where you're having a bunch of therapists consult with one another. What are the buttons that we have? Like, you don't know how to do your job. Like, you think about that, and what does that touch for us? Like, we walk in trying to help people as therapists. We're trying to do all of this, and it's not an easy job, and we're holding space, and you've got a kid who comes in and is like, you don't even know how to do your job. Like, who told you were smart enough to be a therapist? Why should they listen to you?
And Jennifer and I do this with training with counselors.
Yeah.
We don't necessarily do it much with parents anymore. We now do it with counselors because that's just our focus with Passagewise. But it's the same thing, and that's why we say this is parental buttons, but it could just be adult buttons, and it could be counselor buttons. And what does that mean when an adolescent invites you in many ways to be in this emotional exchange?
Yeah.
And one of the things that happens when we get into these emotional places, or when our buttons are pushed, is then we begin interacting with adolescents by pushing their buttons. And so the next thing that we do is we talk with, and you can talk with parents about this, is we talk with parents about how do you push your adolescence buttons.
Well, and imagine doing this in a family therapy session as well, where you're talking about this even with the kid and the parents. We're acknowledging that there's these conflicts, that this gets you to this emotional place. What are the things that mom and dad do, or mom and mom, or dad and dad, whatever it is? What do they do that push your buttons? What are the things that, the kid does to push your parental buttons? And you can have this conversation, and it changes it to a collaborative kind of discussion rather than a finger pointing kind of thing, if you do it well, right?
One of the ones not on this list that I think I've had plenty of adolescents tell me about their counselors is, one of the things that really push their buttons are counselors that ask questions trying to make a point. And I think that's such an interesting thing, because how many times can you think you've asked a question, but you're trying to make a point? Do you think that was the best idea to do it that way? And the adolescent knows that you don't think it was the best idea to do it that way. And so, and that pushes their buttons. It's like, why you're trying to, you're acting like you're asking me a question, but you're trying to tell me something.
Yeah, that's a good one. I think we as adults, we often, we've said this before too, John, that we give ourselves permission to talk to adolescents differently than we talk to adults.
Yeah.
And so we go into these interactions a lot of times. You would not say to an adult, well, so tell me, do you think that was the best way to handle that scenario? And an adult would just look at you like, obviously not. Whereas a teenager is like going, oh, so now you're putting me in my place. That's what you're doing right here. Is this interaction is to try to put me in my place and to tell me how stupid I am. And they go to that emotional place. So, yeah. So what other parental button pushing tactics have you seen? And Noelle, I see your question in there, and we will get to your question for sure too. But what other parental button pushing tactics do adults use that maybe upset teenagers? Telling them what they feel. Oh, it's because of the kids you hang out with. Yes. Mentioning their past mistakes and behaviors, grounding them. I'm the parent because I said so.
That's a great one.
Yeah.
It's you're on it. What wouldn't it be great if, like, I asked you to do something and you said, oh, no, I don't feel comfortable doing that, and I said, you're going to do it because I said so. But we give ourselves permission to say that to an adolescent, but that is such a power move. you know, and adolescents from 2 weeks ago, remember, if you think back to individual development, adolescents are trying to gain their independence, and any maneuver by an adult to overpower them and to lock them down is going to be met with some resistance, some pushback, because they are in a developmental place where that is not a good maneuver for an adult.
Yeah. I mean, and it's the same thing here, repeatedly saying no without giving any other options. I like this one too. When parents want all the info from a teen session.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, you're not allowed to have any privacy. You're not allowed to have any independence. You're not allowed to have any thoughts, you know, that are your own. I need to know everything that's going on, or let's compare siblings. John started doing that to me in our role play. He was like, well, Heather always takes out the trash when I ask her to.
Yeah.
So these are definitely these buttons that get pushed and that we push as adults. And I think as therapists, we try really hard. I think we all have really good intentions, but we get our buttons pushed, and we also will push buttons.
You know, another one that I think I hear from adolescents a lot is that adults will ask them to do things that they don't do themselves. And so in even in terms of, you're going to respect me, as they're disrespecting the adolescent.
Yeah.
Even the way it's said, you're going to respect me, is done in a very disrespectful way. It's a power move. And so how to think about, you know, if you want respect, how to bring that up in a more conversational way, because you're going to respect me is not a conversation. How do we have a respectful relationship here is a conversation.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's easy that as adults, again, we go to that place of, well, I'm older. That means I'm wiser, I know more, and that means I'm going to demand that respect, which is really counterintuitive, because if you're going to demand respect, you're not showing respect, so why are you deserving of respect in their eyes? It just doesn't match.
And I think it's a good point, Jennifer, that you bring up. Even just thinking about the role that you play and what you believe your role, how people should act toward you in the role that you are, whether it's parent, counselor, principal, you know, whatever, you know, and I think that sometimes we have expectations of how people should interact because of my role. And when they don't interact that way, then we're going to enforce our role on someone.
Yeah.
And all of those things, not to say that they're hugely wrong. What we're saying, though, is that they push adolescents' buttons. And then if you get confused why the adolescent is becoming more emotional or more disrespectful or more pushing back, then you're not being aware of your part in the interaction.
Yeah. Well, I love, Christina said, telling them what they feel. So you sit in a session and you're telling this adolescent, I mean, do we tell adults what they feel? Typically not. We might say, well, maybe you feel this, or I would imagine you felt this. But with teenagers, a lot of times we do take this approach of saying, well, you're just angry.
Mm-hmm.
You're just angry that your parents grounded you. And instead of saying, well, tell me about, how you feel about this. Tell me, like, questioning your teenager's restlessness and discontent, how it's not, the problem isn't questioning them, it's how we question them. Do we question their moodiness? Yes. Are they emotional? Are they moody? Of course. Yes. Okay. We acknowledge that. But how do you have that conversation? Do you say, what's gotten into you? Who likes that? Or what's the matter with you? Instead of, hey, I noticed. I've got somebody talking. I don't know who that was.
I got it.
Okay. So it's really, how do you have those conversations? What are the ways that you have conversations that are different? So the question that Noelle asked here was, will you share any intervention specifically for use with oppositional defiance? Oppositional defiance tends to take disrespect and triggering to a whole different level.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, again, if you disagree with this, fine. I think the best intervention is being curious, being genuinely curious. If you're genuinely curious about what they're trying to say to you, what are their hopes? What would they want you to know about this? It's hard to be defiant against something that's not, there's nothing to push back on.
Mm-hmm.
But I think oppositional defiance oftentimes is met, the interventions are control, and which is absolutely incongruent with what oppositional defiance looks like. It's not listening, it's not hearing what the oppositional, what's the underlying message being sent. Kids aren't naturally just that way. And most of the times, defiance is a reaction to something that is happening. Defiance is an interactional problem.
Well, and I think I think in the same kind of tone, like same kind of thought process, it's, I want to know why. What's the function of that oppositional behavior? How is it benefiting that individual? Is that something that's helping them gain some independence in the scenario, so they feel like they don't have any independence or nobody listens to them? So being oppositional is the best way to gain that independence in their eyes. It serves some sort of function, and really thinking about the why. And I think it is when you can be authentic and you can be genuinely interested. I think it changes that whole dynamic. They're not always used to, especially a kid who's been labeled oppositional defiant. Everybody's thinking this is just the bad kid. You look at like the teachers, I was talking with some teachers a few weeks ago, and they were saying that at the beginning of the school year, the teachers would sit in the teacher's lounge and be like, okay, who are the kids that are in your classes? And they'd start looking at them and start labeling like, oh yeah, this one's going to give you problems. This is a really difficult kid. He's going to give you a lot of headaches. And so what do you walk in with? I already believe that this individual is going to give me headaches. They're going to be difficult. Rather than really looking at them and saying, well, I wonder why.
Yeah.
How can I be authentic?
I mean, once you begin telling a story of someone, then you rarely become curious about other stories that can be told of that person. And once somebody's called oppositional defiant, then that's a real difficult story to get out of.
Mm-hmm.
To define behavior differently than it being oppositionally defiant. Because if I'd have told you at the beginning, Jennifer is ODD, and then we did that role play, everything she did was oppositional defiance.
Mm-hmm.
She was defying me. And I could have really, I could have said, look, you're going to take out the garbage, or you're going to pay. You're going to get grounded. And she could have said, F you, run into her room. That's ODD. She's oppositional defiant. And I could have followed her into her room and start lecturing her, and she hits the wall.
Yeah.
And
I'm not saying it
oh,
doesn't exist. I mean, oppositional defiant disorder exists.
Yeah.
I get that.
But it's an interactional diagnosis.
Yeah.
You have to defy something. You have
Right.
to oppose something. What are they opposing? And that's the thing to think about is, am I playing a part as an adult in this interaction that creates what that has an adolescent starting from an emotional place? Am I bringing them deeper into that emotional space, or am I trying to move to some other space
Mm-hmm.
in the interaction?
Yeah.
So
Go ahead, John.
The next question is, so what do we do with parents once they know these things, once they know the buttons that are pushed in them, the buttons that they push? Then what we talk with them about next is, there are some strategies to avoid you pushing their buttons and them pushing your buttons. And this is the list that we utilize. There's other ways there's other strategies, but these are the ones that we talk about with parents, and give them strategies for staying out of those emotional interactions. And some of them are basic, like they've been used forever. Some are fun to me. One of my favorites is using deflectors. The whole idea of saying nevertheless, or regardless, or be that as it may. It's funny because I've done this actually in classes with counselors, and they've come back to me like 2 weeks later and go, my kid hates the word nevertheless. It was like, yeah, they hear, but nevertheless, so it's hey, Jennifer, I need you to take out the garbage.
I don't want to take out the garbage.
But I need you. It's full and it's your job.
It should be someone else's job. I can't do it. I just can't deal with the trash. I've had such a hard day.
Nevertheless, I need you to take it out.
Nevertheless, I need you to take it out. Meanwhile, I'm taking the trash out. Nevertheless.
Yeah. And so it's the whole idea of giving them a breather. It's like a 1 second word that I can use to, instead of going into the emotional exchange, it's saying nevertheless, so I at least hear you, and going back to the details of what I want you to do.
Yeah, it's not engaging. So one of the arguments that we have or like one of our beliefs, I guess is a better way to say it, is that we're really looking for the opportunity to not get into the emotional exchange as the adult. Because once you enter into that emotional exchange on an emotional level, and you're, as the parent, the therapist, etc., as the adult, you're getting emotionally drawn in, you're now on their home playing field, right? So they have home court advantage at that moment in time. And so you're going to be pulled into that, you're going to be drawn into that interaction in an unintentional, you're not intentional about it. So these little deflectors, these little anti-button strategies allow for that time to just take a minute, to not engage, to not get into that, interaction. I mean, as somebody put, you don't have to like it. Yeah. Well, you don't have to like that your job is the trash. We can talk about that later, but right now your job is the trash. So take out the trash. Thank you. And preventing yourself from getting into that interaction. The thing that I like is when John was doing this with some parents, and he'd get a script and he'd say, okay, here, we know what your buttons are. You've got all these buttons all over you. We know that. Now you're going to practice this, and you're going to use a couple of these anti-button strategies. And the other parent practicing with them would say, like, no, I'm not going to do it. You can't tell me what to do. And the parent would start emotionally getting engaged in that scenario. That's not even their kid. That's just, the practice session.
And all the parent had to do was read the script, and they got pulled in, and they'd get off script, and they'd say, well, you're going to listen to me because I'm your dad. And it'd be like, wait, go back to the script. And they go, okay, so how do we want to deal with this? Whatever, Dad. Look, you're going to listen to me, and they just get yanked back in. And so it really is practicing how to not be pulled in. And it's so interesting to me because I think, and I probably think this too, and yeah, I know I do. Adults, we feel like we deserve, because of our age, the respect of the adolescent. And I know when Jennifer and I do this sometimes with adults, with parents, they don't like what we're saying because it feels as though we're putting the adolescent on a similar level to the adult, is what the adults will say, is like, yeah, but they need to know that we're in charge. And it's really interesting to pay attention to that belief. So if any of y'all, if you think about it and think about, I don't like what they're saying because it feels as though I'm letting the adolescent off the hook. I'm not telling them what they need to know. It's something really important for you to pay attention to, because there are going to be buttons all around that belief.
Yeah.
Because if you think you should have a hierarchical relationship to the adolescent and that they should respect your word, yes or no, maybe that's true, and that ain't happening oftentimes. And what are you going to do when that doesn't happen?
Well, and I think too, it's the comment that we have here is Christina says, I teach parents that it's not okay for them as adults to add their own gas to the fire of their kids.
Yeah.
Because everything just gets more out of control. So let's remain calm and cool and blow up in the bathroom later by ourselves. Like, practice our own emotional regulation. And then I think when the emotion isn't center and it's not present, that's when you can have a conversation later of saying, you know, I was thinking about it, and I really think that if we could work on being respectful to one another and not, saying disrespectful things to each other, what do you think I could do to improve in my love or respect to you? What do you think you could do? What do you think we could do to be more respectful? Because I think, especially for parents and kids, like, as your mom, I love you so much and I want these good things for you. And I hate when we have these disagreements and when there's bad feelings between us. And I hope we could talk through things versus just setting everything on fire. And let me just tell you all the ways that your life is going to suck in the future if you don't change your attitude.
It's funny. I don't think I've ever told you this, Jennifer. I was talking to Scott, and we were interested. We were looking at some of the traditional diagnoses that adolescents get. We were looking in the DSM, and when you look at criteria, it's all things that adults just don't like adolescents doing. And it cracks me up. I mean, even oppositional defiant, it's a bunch. It's almost like, actually, Scott got some of the button pushing things from the criteria. It's things that we don't, because adolescents aren't involved in creating the DSM.
Right.
So it's things that adults are irritated with what adolescents do in their emotional world.
Mm-hmm. And I don't think I would say that they're not irritating. I think it's irritating.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. But how we handle it is going to determine what that scenario is going to be next. Yeah. But I love the thought that, and I know we're about out of time and the evaluation and code is in the chat, but I love that idea that oppositional defiance is this interactional diagnosis. Like, it is how you react to people.
Yeah.
And relationships. So as we look through, here's the evaluation and here's the code. Because I know that's important and I know we have 5 minutes. What did you need to say, John?
One other just to point out is the idea of why is asking yourself, why is this kid saying this? Yeah. And what is behind the message? Virginia Satir calls that a meta message. It's like we send a verbal message, but then there's a secondary message that's sent. And that's usually the message that we're not paying attention to. Mm-hmm. We're paying attention to the verbal message, and that's where buttons get pushed. And we're missing what the real message is. And so I think that's an important piece for parents to know, but also for counselors to know. The easiest way to do that is like if Jeanette asks, how's it going, John? And I go, I'm fine. Well, I said I was fine. That's the words that came out of my mouth. But there's another message being sent. And so how do you pay attention when a kid's saying, F you? And you freaking out and your buttons are getting pushed because they just said those words. But what's the message behind it? And how do you pay attention to it? How do you stay curious to it? Because the FU is a total invitation for parents, especially, to go into lecture mode. Look, you're not going to tell me how to do and try to shut it down, try to overpower. When usually FU, the meta message is, leave me alone. I need independent, I need some space.
Mhm.
And I need some space is met with, I'm going to be all over you.
Yeah. But I like this comment too. They're supposed to be irritating. They're supposed to be doing these things. It's how they learn how to interact with others and manage their emotional struggles. And if they didn't act like that as teenagers, then we will have adults with bigger issues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's so true.
Yeah.
So true. One of the things that I threw in, and I know we've got a couple slides left, but I just said and I think this is for therapists as well, like other strategies that we need to do is we need to build our support systems. We need to take care of ourselves. We need to look at and be aware and honest about our own reactions and emotions.
Uh-huh.
And then we need to recognize our fears for the kids, for our clients, for our own kids, and the expectations for them. And what are we putting on them? And can we be self-aware?
And I think expectations is a big one.
Yeah.
I work with supervisees that say they need to listen to this. And I'm like, no, they don't.
Yeah.
They don't need to. They maybe it'd be a good idea, but they don't, it's not a requirement. They need to figure out how to know. And what I'm doing is I'm trying to highlight that's an expectation that gets you caught up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think just in our culture, we as parents, there's a lot of expectations, a lot of things that are put on, kids based on parents' expectations, based on what a parent wants to do to compare themselves to another parent and what another kid is doing. And so I think it's just important to pay attention to that. So I know we're at 12:59. Just want to make sure. I know people this is their lunch and they get back to their sessions. So thank you guys.
Yeah,
Make sure you do that evaluation.
Thank y'all for being a part of this, and the chat was great. I really appreciate it. It's always good to hear other ideas. I mean, it expands us and it gives us more space to think about this. So thank you.
Yeah. And somebody mentioned the book Anatomy of Peace, and it's fabulous. That's a great book for families too.
Joseph, and you put the thing in the chat.
Yep. I'll drop it in one more time just in case someone missed it.
Yeah, all the thank yous will bury it.
Yeah, there's the evaluation again. Make sure you get that, everybody.
Also, if you have any issues accessing the evaluation, I know sometimes Intermountain's firewall has issues. Just go ahead and email me. I'm happy to send it to you or send it to a different email address that you might have, just to work around any firewalls that might be blocking. Just let me know. We're happy to work with you.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.